Working the late shift at Walmart had always been a strange mix of peace and unease for me. On one hand, I appreciated the quiet. No screaming kids, no endless lines, and no managers breathing down your neck about productivity. But on the other hand, the emptiness made the store feel wrong. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional clatter of a misplaced item falling, and the vast rows of empty aisles all contributed to a creeping sense of isolation. That night started like any other. My shift began at 10 p.m. and I clocked in, ready to endure another long stretch of stocking shelves, organizing inventory, and cleaning up after the day's chaos. By midnight, the store was nearly empty, save for a few straggling customers. I had just finished reorganizing the toy section when I first noticed him. He was in the electronics section, standing in front of the security monitor display. It's not uncommon for people to stop and stare at the screens, usually out of curiosity or boredom. But there was something different about him. He wasn't just glancing at the screens, he was fixated on them. His eyes didn't move, and his posture was rigid, like he was studying something very carefully. I shrugged it off and went back to my tasks, but something about him stuck in my mind. Around 1 a.m., I passed by the electronics section again, and he was still there. He hadn't moved an inch. I tried to get a better look at him without being obvious. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with unkempt hair and a disheveled outfit that seemed slightly too big for him. His face was pale, and his expression was blank. It was like he wasn't entirely present, almost like he was in a trance. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, trying to sound polite but also hoping to break whatever weird spell he seemed to be under. He didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge me. His eyes stayed glued to the monitors. Feeling a little unnerved, I decided to leave him be and went to the back room to grab some more stock. An hour later, I was restocking the snacks aisle when I felt it. That uncomfortable sensation of being watched. I turned my head slightly and caught a glimpse of him at the end of the aisle, partially hidden by a shelf. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring. My heart skipped a beat, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just wandering the store and happened to end up near me. Still, the way he was standing, so still, so deliberate, made my skin crawl. I decided to head to another part of the store, hoping he'd lose interest. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were following me. By 3 a.m., the store was completely empty. Even the stragglers had left, and it was just me and one other employee, Sarah, who was working in the garden section. I hadn't seen the man in a while, and I started to think he might have left. But then I passed by the security monitors in the back office, as well as the furniture. The place looked bloody. There he was again, this time in the hardware section. He wasn't browsing or touching anything, just standing in the middle of the aisle, staring straight ahead. I switched the camera view to the other aisles and froze. The footage showed him moving from section to section, always stopping in places where I had been working just moments before. It was like he was following me, but staying just out of sight. My stomach twisted. I decided to call Sarah to let her know what was going on. She answered after a few rings, her voice groggy and annoyed. "What is it?" she asked. I explained the situation, but she just laughed it off. "He's probably some weirdo killing time. Don't overthink it." Her dismissal didn't make me feel any better, but I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I let it go, resolved to keep my distance from the man until my shift ended. At around 4 a.m., I went to the stockroom to grab some cleaning supplies. As I walked through the narrow, dimly lit corridor, I heard the faint footsteps echoing behind me. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. My pulse quickened as I hurried to grab what I needed and get out of there. When I returned to the main floor, the man was nowhere in sight. I checked the security monitors again, but he wasn't on any of the cameras. Relieved, I started to think he might have finally left. But that relief didn't last long. Around 4:30 a.m., I went to clean up the freezer section. As I crouched down to organize some items, I heard a soft shuffling noise. I looked up and nearly screamed. The man was standing at the end of the aisle, his face partially obscured by the shadow of the shelves. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a single step toward me. I backed away, my heart pounding. He took another step, and then another. The closer he got, the more I realized there was something terribly wrong with his face. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and his mouth was slightly open, revealing crooked teeth. He looked unnatural, like a distorted version of a person. I turned and ran. My only thought was to get to the security office where I could lock the door and call the police. I could hear his footsteps behind me, quick and deliberate. He wasn't running, but he was keeping pace, and the sound of his heavy breathing sent chills down my spine. I made it to the security office and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. As I waited for the dispatcher to answer, I glanced at the security monitors. As I was expecting, someone panicked and ran. I immediately accessed the networks. The man was standing right outside the office, staring directly into the camera. He wasn't trying to get in. He was just standing there, watching. I told the dispatcher what was happening, and she assured me that officers were on their way. But before they arrived, the man did something that still haunts me to this day. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, and held it up to the camera. Written on it, in bold, messy letters, was my name. When the police arrived, the man was gone. They searched the entire store but found no sign of him. However, they did find something else, evidence that someone had tampered with the locks on the doors and the security cameras. It was as if he had planned this night in advance. But God's way of healing is through Luke. I quit my job the next day. The experience left me shaken, and I couldn't bring myself to set foot in that store again. I moved to a new town, hoping to leave it all behind. But a week after I settled into my new place, I received a package. Inside was a single piece of paper with the same bold, messy handwriting. It read, "She, you, Sue." There's a Walmart in my hometown that everyone seems to avoid after dark. Located in a small, isolated town, it's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and rumors spread like wildfire. For years, people have whispered about strange occurrences at the store. Customers who entered late at night, never to be seen again. The stories were always dismissed as urban legends, something to scare kids and newcomers. But for me, it became horrifyingly real when my best friend, Claire, vanished. Claire was like a sister to me. She had always been adventurous and fearless, which is probably why she didn't think twice about heading to Walmart late one night to grab some last-minute supplies. I remembered texting her that evening, asking if she wanted to hang out. She replied, "Heading to Walmart real quick, be back soon." That was the last message I ever got from her. When Claire didn't show up the next day, I started to panic. Her car was found abandoned in the Walmart parking lot, but there was no sign of her. The police conducted a half-hearted investigation, brushing it off as a possible runaway case, despite her family's protests. But I knew Claire. She would never leave without telling someone. Desperate for answers, I decided to do something reckless. I would go to Walmart myself, at the same time she had, and see if I could uncover anything. It was just past midnight when I pulled into the empty parking lot. The store looked unnervingly ordinary, but the silence felt heavy, oppressive. The fluorescent lights inside cast a harsh glow, making the shadows outside seem even darker. My heart raced as I walked through the sliding doors, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. The store was eerily quiet. A single cashier stood at the front, staring blankly at their register, and a few employees milled about, stocking shelves. I wandered the aisles aimlessly at first, trying to act casual while keeping an eye out for anything unusual. At first glance, everything seemed normal, until I reached the snack aisle. There, lying on the floor, was a wallet. My breath caught as I picked it up and opened it. Inside was Claire's driver's license. My hands trembled as I looked around, half expecting her to appear out of nowhere, but the aisle was empty. The air felt colder, and a prickling sensation ran down my spine. I pocketed the wallet and continued searching, my unease growing with every step. Then I noticed something else. A single dusty shoe sitting in the middle of an aisle. It looked out of place, as if it had been there for a long time. The shoe was eerily similar to a pair Claire owned. I bent down to examine it, but a sudden noise made me freeze. A faint, muffled sound, like a whisper or a moan, echoed from somewhere deep in the store. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding. The sound seemed to be coming from the back of the store, near the stockroom. Summoning what little courage I had, I decided to investigate. As I made my way to the back, I noticed an employee standing by the customer service desk. Their expression was unnervingly blank, and their movements seemed robotic. I approached them cautiously. "Excuse me, have you seen this person?" I asked, showing them a photo of Claire on my phone. The employee's eyes flickered to the screen, then back to me. "I'm sorry, I can't help you," they said flatly. Their tone was devoid of emotion, and they immediately turned away, as if dismissing me. The interaction left me more unsettled than ever, but I pushed forward. Near the stockroom, I noticed something strange, a large shelf that didn't quite sit flush against the wall. The floor beneath it had scrape marks, as if it had been moved recently. My curiosity outweighed my fear, and I pushed against the shelf. It slid back with a groan, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passageway. The air inside the passage was damp and smelled faintly of mildew. My phone's flashlight barely pierced the darkness as I cautiously stepped inside. The corridor led to a series of small, makeshift rooms. What I saw inside made my stomach churn. The first room was filled with abandoned shopping carts, each containing personal belongings, purses, phones, and even children's toys. It was as if someone had carefully collected the remnants of lives left behind. In another room, there were stacks of handwritten notes and photographs. Some of the notes were desperate pleas for help, while others were incoherent scribbles. My hands shook as I picked up one of the photos. It was of Claire, taken at an angle that suggested she hadn't known she was being watched. A faint sound of footsteps echoed from deeper within the passageway, snapping me out of my horror. I quickly ducked into the shadows, holding my breath as the footsteps grew louder. Two employees walked past, talking in hushed voices. "We'll need to move them soon. The boss doesn't want any more attention drawn to this place," one of them said. "Yeah, the last one's family is already causing too much trouble," the other replied. My blood ran cold. They were talking about Claire and others like her. I waited until their voices faded before continuing down the passage. Finally, I reached a large chamber that took my breath away for all the wrong reasons. How did she live like this, so happy, so content, so ready to laugh and play with her little brothers? The room was filled with people. Some were unconscious, lying on the floor or slumped against the walls, while others sat in a daze, their eyes vacant and glassy. Among them, I spotted Claire. She was sitting against a wall, her head lolling to the side. She looked pale and weak, but she was alive. I ran to her side, shaking her gently. "Claire, it's me! Wake up!" Again. Her eyes fluttered open and she mumbled something I couldn't understand. I tried to lift her, but she was too weak to stand. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't carry her out on my own. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared, and the room was flooded with red light. The employees must have noticed the shelf was moved. Heavy footsteps echoed through the passages, growing louder by the second. I had no choice but to hide. I dragged Claire behind a stack of crates and crouched down, praying we wouldn't be found. The employees stormed into the chamber, their flashlights sweeping across the room. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. One of the flashlights lingered near our hiding spot, but then it moved on. After what felt like an eternity, they left. I knew I had to act quickly. I found a metal pipe among the crates and used it to break a small window near the ceiling. The noise was deafening, but I had no other choice. I hoisted Claire up first, then climbed out after her. We landed in the grass outside, gasping for air. I called 911 and the police arrived within minutes. They raided the store and uncovered the hidden passages, but many of the employees, including the ones in charge, had already fled. Claire and the others were taken to the hospital, and though she eventually recovered physically, she never spoke about what happened to her in that chamber. The trauma was too deep. The town was shaken to its core by the revelations, but questions lingered. How long had this been going on? How many people were involved? And worst of all, was it truly over? A week after the raid, I received a letter in the mail. It was written in messy, uneven handwriting and contained only 2 words: keep quiet. Walmart's graveyard shift always had an eerie vibe. Maybe it was the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, or the oppressive silence that filled the aisles when the crowds thinned out. But this story isn't about the typical oddities of working late. It's about something much worse. A few years ago, I worked the overnight stocking shift at a Walmart in a small town. Our store was undergoing renovations and several aisles were blocked off with tarps and caution signs. Management told us it was to expand the store's layout, but the areas were so dimly lit and abandoned that they seemed more like the set of a horror movie than a construction site. One particular night, my coworker Jake and I were assigned to restock the grocery section near the closed-off aisles. Jake was a jokester, always looking to liven up our dull shifts with pranks or ghost stories. I wasn't superstitious, but that night, even I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we worked, I started hearing faint whispers. At first, I thought it was Jake messing with me, but when I glanced over, he was busy stacking canned goods. The whispers were so soft that I couldn't make out any words, but they seemed to be coming from behind the tarp that covered one of the closed aisles. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the wind, or maybe the sound of the air conditioning. "You hear that?" Jake asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I froze for a moment before replying. "Yeah, it's probably just the vents," Marion said. "In her lifetime?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "The vents? In this section?" "Come on, man, you know this place is haunted." I rolled my eyes. "Haunted? Really? It's just a store." But Jake wasn't laughing. "You've never heard the stories? About this land?" he asked, lowering his voice like he didn't want anyone else to overhear. No, I said, trying to keep my tone casual, "and I'm not interested." "Suit yourself," he replied, smirking. "But if you see a shadow that doesn't belong to anyone, don't say I didn't warn you." Despite myself, I couldn't shake his words. As the shift went on, the whispers grew louder, and I started noticing movement out of the corner of my eye. Whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just the dark, empty aisles and the faint rustle of the tarps. Around 2 a.m., Jake and I took our break. As we sat in the back room, he brought up the whispers again. "We should check it out," he said, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Are you serious?" I asked. "Come on," he urged. "What's the worst that could happen?" I wanted to say no, but curiosity got the better of me. We grabbed a couple of flashlights and headed toward the blocked-off section. The air felt colder as we approached, and the whispers became clearer. They weren't just sounds anymore, they were voices. murmuring words I couldn't understand. We lifted the edge of the tarp and slipped inside. The area was a mess of construction materials and half-built shelving units. Dust hung in the air, and our footsteps echoed unnaturally loud. As we moved deeper into the renovation zone, the voices grew louder, surrounding us like a chorus of the unseen. "Hello?" Jake called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Anyone back here?" There was no answer, but the whispers abruptly stopped. The silence was deafening, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. That's when we saw it. A shadow moving across the far wall. It was tall and human-shaped, but there was no one there to cast it. Jake shone his flashlight in the direction of the shadow, but it disappeared the moment the light hit it. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. We turned to leave, but as we did, something caught my eye. In the corner of the aisle, partially buried under debris, was a small, dust-covered plaque. I picked it up and wiped it clean, revealing an inscription. It was a dedication, marking the land as the site of a tragic event from over a century ago. The details were vague, but it mentioned a fire and the loss of several lives. Jake was reading over my shoulder when the whispers returned, louder than before. This time they were accompanied by a low, guttural moaning. The shadows began to move again, darting across the walls like predators circling their prey. One of them stepped out from the wall, taking on a more solid form. It was humanoid but twisted, with elongated limbs and a face that was barely more than a hollow void. "Down!" Jake screamed, grabbing my arm. We bolted toward the tarp, but the shadows followed. They moved unnaturally fast, closing the distance between us in seconds. Just as one of them reached out, Jake yanked the tarp aside, and we stumbled into the brightly lit main aisles. The shadows stopped at the edge of the renovation zone, retreating into the darkness as if the light hurt them. We collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. Neither of us spoke for a long time. When we finally reported what happened to the manager, he dismissed it as a hallucination caused by lack of sleep. But the way he avoided looking us in the eye made me think he knew more than he was letting on. Jake and I never set foot in the renovation zone again, and a few weeks later we both quit. I heard that the renovations were completed without incident, but some of the newer employees have reported hearing whispers in the aisles late at night. One even claimed to have seen a shadow that didn't belong to anyone. Whatever we disturbed that night, it's still there, lurking in the shadows, and waiting for someone foolish enough to venture too close. If you ever find yourself in a Walmart late at night, be careful where you wander. You never know what might be watching you.